6 children vanished without a trace. 1 escaped. And the only 2 people who knew the truth died before they could be questioned. No bodies, no confessions, no answers. 35 years later, this case still haunts South Africa. A case so twisted, so confusing, that the deeper you go into it, the less anything makes sense. Tonight, we are opening the file of Gert van Rooyen. Welcome back to 14th Avenue Haunting. This is where we dive deep into South Africa's most unsettling mysteries, hauntings, and true crime cases. Before we begin, I need to give a serious trigger warning. This video contains sensitive material, including references to child disappearances, psychological trauma, abuse of all forms, and later in the documentary, blurred autopsy photos. Nothing in this video is stated as fact. This is a case filled with conflicting information, speculation, and unanswered questions. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Before we get into today's story, if you love true crime, hauntings, and mysterious happenings and history, please hit that subscribe button. I am here for you as often as I get a chance to tell some of these stories. And then also a major shout out to the Upside Down Paranormal. It is a South African-based paranormal investigations team that I'm also a part of. We investigate South Africa's most haunted and abandoned locations, and more recently, we are busy filming for a haunted ghost hunting series coming to your screens very soon. Okay, but let's take a deep breath. This case has consumed my mind for the past week. As a reference, today's Friday. On Monday, I decided that for this Sunday, I really want to cover the case of Gert van Rooyen. But man, I was not prepared for the level of confusing information that this case has. I'm going to try today and cover every single piece of information out there. The chances are super high that I might miss something, so please, if you have anything to add, please put it in the comments. I would love to know, and having a little bit of extra information is great, but this case consumed my week. The moment I thought I knew everything, I accidentally stumbled upon new information, and I am not a tinfoil hatter at all. But this case had me second guessing the facts, the evidence. It's a lot. It really is a lot. And I think the other part that also consumed my week is the fact that if you are a parent, not knowing where your child is, I cannot fathom that. And I truly have sympathy, and I can feel for those parents. It bugs me as someone who never knew them directly. I wasn't even born when this happened, but I don't know, I can't fathom that. So as I talk about this case, please keep in mind that most of these relatives of these victims are still alive. So when you do comment, please be respectful in the comments. I don't know if they'll ever actually watch this, but if they do, just keep in mind that they might. Okay, but let's get started on what I call probably the darkest mystery in South Africa. To understand the man that Gert van Rooyen became, we have to go back to the beginning. Long before the disappearances, long before Joey Haarhoff, long before anyone suspected that his name would be tied to one of the darkest mysteries in South Africa. Gert Cornelius Gerardus van Rooyen, try saying that 5 times in a row, was born on 11th April 1938. The exact town that he was born in isn't exactly known, and there are different variations of the town that he was born in, so rather safe than sorry, I'm just going to say that he was born in South Africa. In the 1950s, he was living on Bloot Street in Pretoria, and neighbors remember the house always being shut, rarely open. One of them said the children were told not to play with Gert. Whether that's true or not, I'm not entirely sure, but that's one of the claims that has come forward. And then another source recalled that one day you will see Gert and the next day you won't. He didn't really play with the other children in the streets or in the neighborhood. As a young man, Gert already started showing signs of violent behavior, of very low moral values, and that started in 1954. He was sent to a reform school for theft, having stolen a car and driven it from Cape Town to Pretoria to visit his sick mother. After his release, he was convicted once again for stealing car parts and clothes. But beyond that, surprisingly, for someone who would become one of the most notorious criminals in South Africa, there isn't much more known about his childhood or his upbringing. There are no credible interviews, no school records, no psychological evaluations done that survive public records today. But also I have to add a fact, and that is that South Africa is excruciatingly bad at keeping historical records. So it's kind of unsurprising. He married twice and fathered 2 children. And by 1983, his second wife divorced him. However, in 1979, Gert abducted 2 young girls, drove them up to Hartbeespoortdam. The girls were aged 10 and 13, and according to media reporting, during the abduction, Gert assaulted them, forced them to commit sexual acts, and then the following day they were released in Pretoria. He was soon arrested, tried and convicted on charges of abduction, sexual assault, and common assault. And he was sentenced to only 4 years imprisonment. And public records show that he only served 3 of those 4 years before he was released. So already we're seeing an escalation in his crimes, from stealing a car, stealing clothing and motor parts, to now being caught abducting children. And the difference between these 2 and those that come later, he set these 2 free. So in my mind, I'm wondering if he realized that letting them go actually ends up causing a lot more issues for him. So letting them free at the end of the day would get him into trouble. That's just a thought I'm having, that maybe he thought after the release of these 2, knowing what was to come. After serving his sentence, Van Rooyen kind of faded away from the public's attention. He had a construction company with his brother, and in 1988, he met Joey Haarhoff. Her full name is Francina Johanna Hermina Haarhoff, a 47-year-old woman, a single mother who had lost her husband earlier in the year due to a sudden heart attack. Before meeting Van Rooyen, Joey was a single mother working as an accounts clerk. She was described by family as being soft and friendly, but according to her own daughter, that is not the case. In a Focus interview, Joey's daughter Amor spoke about the childhood she experienced, including being beaten by her mother, sexually abused by her father, with the knowledge of her mother, and years of verbal abuse. Amor is such a strong person. She's suffered a lot of trauma, and she actually brought out a book if you guys want to go and read it. She is truly an inspiring person, who is on the path of not repeating or not cycling the same life path as her mother did. She's actively trying to become the complete opposite of her mother, and she's achieving it. She's nowhere near the same person as her mother. But ultimately, Joey wasn't as innocent as described. She too had a dark side, hidden behind closed doors. Not long after Gert and Joey met in Silverton, they actually moved in together and got engaged quite quickly. The two of them seemed to be a match made in heaven, but ultimately, it was a match made in hell. Tracey-lee Scott-Crossley was the youngest child of Paul and Lorraine Scott-Crossley. She was only 14 years old and had 2 older brothers. Her parents got divorced when Tracey was only 10 years old, and she lived with the mom on the corner of Queens Avenue and Beatrice Street in Windsor East, Johannesburg. She was a grade 8 pupil going to Northcliffe High School. The parents reconciled in March 1988. They moved to Alberton before the parents separated again, and they ended up moving back on August 1st, 1988. Tracey is said to have stayed home from school. On that day, she decided she wanted to go to a Cresta shopping center that is close by. She asked her brother Mark to accompany her, to which he said he had other things to do, that he was not going to accompany her, and she ended up going alone. The time that she left the house is unclear, but at around 4 p.m., witnesses saw Tracey getting into a beige, yellow, it depends on the witness, Volkswagen Beetle, with a man and a woman in the car. Coincidentally, Gert van Rooyen worked for a company who installed fire doors at the time, and en route to one of his jobs was the Cresta shopping center. He had a lady who rented in the back of his house in Malherbe Street, who owned a beige Volkswagen Beetle that Gert is said to have regularly used. But ultimately, Tracey was never seen again. An extra detail to the family of Tracey is that her brother Mark would end up murdering somebody. In January of 2004, 37-year-old Mark Scott-Crossley and an accomplice assaulted a man and threw him into a den with 3 lions. That man being Nelson Chisale. I hope I'm pronouncing the surname correctly, sorry guys. This happened in Hoedspruit. Mark was eventually arrested. He was convicted and received life imprisonment. He ultimately blamed all of the happenings on the trauma from losing his sister. He sat with a lot of guilt since he was the one that told her that he wouldn't go with her, and that if he had gone, this wouldn't have happened. But I'm going to give my opinion on this because I feel like that doesn't make sense to me. Why would ending the life of someone else have to do with your trauma? I don't know. I don't think Nelson deserved it regardless. But that's just how I feel about that part of the story. Because Nelson's skull and gnawed bones were all that was found in the lion's den. However, he was set free in 2010 after appeals when the court decided that the prosecution didn't provide enough proof that Nelson was actually alive when he was being thrown to the lions. So, a life in prison for him meant 5 years. But that's not all. In 2016, Mark ran over a farm worker in Hoedspruit, and he was only sentenced to 8 years in prison for attempted murder. To me, this shows a major flaw in our judicial system. If Mark had actually served his life imprisonment, then The farm worker would never have been run over. He survived the incident, but he's going to sit with lifelong traumas because of it. And how does one person get to commit so many acts of violence and keep walking away free? And I don't know, Mark, so obviously I'm just talking from a perspective that the first one was a murder, he only spent 5 years, then attempted murder, only 8. And I don't know, something is very wrong about that. It doesn't make sense to me. But let's not let this overshadow the fact that Tracey-lee vanished, never to be seen again. On the 22nd of December, 3 days before Christmas in 1988, Fiona Harvey disappeared. The only 11-year-old lived with her parents, Eve and Richard, on 17 Marland Drive in Clarendon, Pietermaritzburg. She loved horse riding, she loved drawing, and she was described as a very quiet kid. Now, there are conflicting timelines, what time exactly Fiona left her home. So I'm just going to say 1 because that's the most accepted one, but some say 12, some say 1. But regardless, let's just say she left her house at 1, saying that she was going to go buy milk for her mother at what they called back then the tea room. It was like a cafe. So she walked to the store to go buy her mother some milk. She was barefoot, dressed in a t-shirt and shorts. The owner of the store did confirm that in fact she did make it to the store. She bought, if I have my facts correctly, like 4 liters of milk, and he placed them, one in a pink bag, one in a blue bag, and sent her on her way. The mother became worried after a while when she realized that Fiona did not return home yet. So she decided to go to the store herself, and she asked the store owner when the owner confirmed that Fiona was here but she had left. So in a frantic state, she doesn't know where Fiona is. She started going into the streets, asking neighbors, asking any passerbys if they had seen Fiona. Very quickly, a neighborhood search began. They also phoned the police, and they also joined the search for little 11-year-old Fiona Harvey. But despite this, there was no trace of where Fiona had gone. Only again on the 28th of December 1988 did the first tip come in. Ernie Potgieter, a resident from Moreland Road, said that he saw a colored man wearing a white cap who was driving a white El Camino LDV, and he was seen talking to Fiona. It is claimed that Fiona shook her head, and then he made a U-turn and drove into the direction that she was walking in. And this was corroborated by another resident who also lived on Moreland Road. Then a boy also came forward who said he also saw a white LDV, but at the tea room. He saw Fiona on her way into the store when a man sitting in the LDV started talking to Fiona. He witnessed that this man also had a lady sitting in the passenger side. And then on Fiona's way out, she encountered the same man again. So the boy went into the store, and by the time he came out, he saw the LDV kind of, pulling away at speed, and he noticed that only the man was left in the LDV. The woman, as well as Fiona, was nowhere in sight. On January 4th, 1989, another tip came in. It was claimed that a colored man in a white LDV has been seen trying to pick up girls in the area, and that there was a lot of complaints regarding this. On January 5th, 1990, another tip came in where someone claimed that they also saw a white LDV making a U-turn on the day of Fiona's disappearance. On January 18, 1989, the school principal that Fiona Harvey was in said that a pupil came forward claiming that a maroon vehicle approached Fiona. However, that maroon vehicle drove off without Fiona. On the 8th of March 1989, another tip came in where there was a complaint of a white man with dark complexion has been seen following children around on foot trying to pick them up. This man was seen driving a light blue LDV and is often accompanied by a white female. The principal of the school, Mr. Rhodes, was also interviewed, to which he confirmed that his son has a beige LDV with a white canopy that he borrowed on the day, and he was in the vicinity of Roberts Road, where various people have confirmed that that's the road where they saw her disappear. And people also claim that he has a white cap that he often wears that resembles the man that so many other people saw on the day of Fiona's disappearance. There were so many suspects in the case of Fiona Harvey, including Willem Skroefie van Merwe, who I will definitely cover on a completely different story. This is actually quite an interesting one. I did not know about this guy until I did research on this case. But he was also eliminated as a suspect since one of the witnesses said that it was definitively not Willem who he saw on the day of Fiona's disappearance. Unfortunately, Fiona's case went cold. She was also never seen again. On June 7, 1989, Joan Horn disappeared. She was a 12-year-old from Pretoria. On the day, she was walking home from the shops with some of her friends when a white pickup truck was parked on the side of the road. A woman then approached Joan and offered her money in exchange. Joan had to get into the truck with her to give her directions to a certain centre nearby. Joan agreed and told her friends to let her sister know, and unfortunately, Joan was never seen again. On September 22nd, 1989, Odette Boucher and Annemarie Wapenaar disappeared. They were 11 and 12 years old, and both were from Kempton Park. Both of them were walking on their way to go swimming, and unfortunately, they were never seen again. However, it is unclear when exactly, but after their disappearance, both of the parents received letters from Odette and Annemarie claiming that they had run away to Durban. November 3rd, 1989, the 12-year-old niece of Joey, Yolanda Wessels, disappeared. She was last seen near a shop at Joey and Gert's house, and the shop owner claimed that he saw Yolanda leave the store with a woman, got into a combi, and drove off. When Amor, Joey's mom, actually asked Joey if it was true that Yolanda had disappeared, Joey's reply to her was, "Yes, it is, but they didn't want her anyway," which Amor found very puzzling, because that's completely the opposite of the kind of relationship that Yolanda had with her parents. But at this point, 6 children were missing, all from various areas in South Africa, and no one had a clue of where they could have gone. Joan Booysen, a 16-year-old from Pretoria, was abducted. On 11 January 1990, Joan was standing on the church plain waiting for a bus to take her home. A woman approached her and asked her if she needed a lift. Joan eventually agreed and thought to herself, this lady seems innocent enough, and she got into the car and they drove off. That woman was Joey Haarhoff. Joey told Joan that she first wanted to make a stop at her house, and Joan reluctantly agreed. Once they got to 227 Malherbe Street in Capital Park, both entered the house. Joan described that all the doors in the hallways were closed, and in one particular room, Joan noted that there were different school uniforms laid out. So Joan asked Joey about it, and Joey kind of brushed it off. It's my kids' clothes and I need to give it to somebody. Joey led Joan eventually into one of the rooms, and when Joan turned around, Joey was gone, but in her place stood Gert van Rooyen. He advanced on Joan and tried to kiss her before he slapped her. Joey returned with restraints and stockings, a glass of water, and a handful of pills. They forced Joan to drink the pills, tied her up, and put her in like a hallway closet. She was ultimately sexually assaulted by Gert. Gert had to unexpectedly leave his house, leaving Joan and Joey behind. But as was described in the Huisgenoot episode about the Gert van Rooyen case, it is said that Joan had the idea of MacGyver in her head and actually managed to get herself loose. Drugged, she exited the closet, stumbled around trying to find Joey, and then she noticed that Joey wasn't at the door. So she took that opportunity, opened the door, ran out, and ran into the streets trying to find someone to help her. Eventually, she did find someone, but Joey caught up to both of them. Joey tried to brush it off, explaining to the person that this is my child, we got into an argument, nothing is wrong here. But luckily the Samaritan was like, I don't know, something feels off here. So they told her, I'm going to take her to the police station. You can come and pick your daughter up there. And that's exactly what he did, or she did. I'm not sure, but regardless, I think it's such a relief to know that they actually did that. They didn't take Joey's account and rather looked at the situation at hand and thought, no, this feels wrong. So well done to that person. That's when the police started zoning in on the Van Rooyens. But it would seem that after this incident, that both Joey Haarhof and Gert van Rooyen vanished. A manhunt was set for them, and surveillance on the house began. In the meantime, Joey's daughter returned home. When they found that their sliding door had been broken, and when they entered their house, they found both Joey and Gert in their house. Joey told her daughter that they were in big trouble, that they had tried to abduct and sell a police's daughter, and she escaped. So Amor told them to, just hand themselves over, just, go to the police station. And then Joey said, you don't understand. If they catch us, they will kill us. And ultimately, the pair decided to leave. They got in the car and they drove off. In a frantic state, Amor phoned her aunt and told her what she had just experienced, when the aunt told her, but think about it. Think about the composite sketches. Think about the bakkie and the combi. Your parents are the people who has been abducting these girls. On 16 January 1990, police received information that Joey and Gert had been in KZN, but that they were on their way back. They hadn't seen any news in the newspapers. There were no headlines about this girl that had been abducted and escaped, so they assumed that the police were not aware of the situation. So they felt like it was safe enough for them to return. So police took this opportunity to go to their house and wait for them. They saw the bakkie approach the house, But rather than go into his driveway, he ended up driving past it. This, unfortunately, ultimately led to a police chase. Police had no choice but to attempt to capture their suspects. The police chase went on for a few kilometers when close to Flower Street, there is a low-lying bridge on the Apies River where Gert kind of slightly pulled off. He allegedly pushed Joey's head onto his lap and shot her. And then he pointed the gun to himself and shot himself as well, taking not only his accomplice, but any answers to the disappearances of these girls to his grave. Gert's house was searched, and they found evidence that belonged to some of the victims. Annemarie's house keys and her class captain badge. A note with her address was found under a carpet in the garage. Odette's bag with some clothes was found. The letters and the envelopes that match those that Odette and Annemarie's parents received was also found in the house. And allegedly some other evidence belonging to other victims were also found in the house. After not finding more information, they broadened their search and even went to KZN to go and find additional information or evidence and try to locate these girls. Absa Bank eventually donated the house to the police, so they started excavation and they started to demolish the house piece by piece, brick by brick, vacuuming the ceiling, or not the ceiling, but the roof was removed, and they vacuumed for like hairs and any evidence of the girls having been there. Bones were found on the grounds, but it was confirmed to be not human. Also, a week before Joey passed away, she had written a letter to her mother asking for forgiveness and claimed that Gert wasn't as bad a man as people are making him out to be, and that he led her to God. The yard is still there today, gated and a haunted reminder of what happened to those 6 girls. I've been there. We drove up the one day. I wanted to see it for myself, and I have to say, there's like you can feel it there. It's very hard to sit there knowing that, at least 6 girls were there. At least 6 girls that was the last place we know that they were. What happened to them afterwards, no one knows. But there is a memorial placed on there for in remembrance of those 6 girls. But what happened to the girls? Where are they? There are 2 major theories that exist today. Number 1 being that Gert abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered them, and either hid their bodies somewhere, got rid of it somehow. And then the second theory is that Gert van Rooyen and Joey Haarhof was part of a major trafficking ring, and that they were simply just a piece on the chessboard. One lead that points to the latter is that 5 months after Joey and Gert passed away, at the Fabric Library in Midrand, a letter was uncovered that seemed to have been written by Annemarie Wapenaar, that stated that the 2 girls had been abducted, and they tried to phone but they didn't get through. However, in later years, that letter seemed to have been faked. Unfortunately, for one thing, Annemarie Wapenaar was Afrikaans, though the note was written in English. That both of their names were spelled incorrectly, which I think is such an odd detail if you were the victim to write your names incorrectly. And that there was some inconsistencies in the handwriting when it was analyzed. Initially, this obviously prompted some hope for the families, but unfortunately, it does seem like the note is fake. There was also claims that Anne-Marie phoned from the airport, stating that she was at the airport. But unfortunately, that's the last time anyone heard from Anne-Marie. She was never heard or seen from again. And then claims of this being part of a trafficking ring is the fact that there's a conspiracy going around that Gert did not kill himself, that rather his life was ended at the hands of the police during the police chase. And one supporting evidence, I guess you could say, that has been brought forward is that in the autopsy photos, you can see that Gert had been shot in the back of the head. And it is claimed that that would be kind of hard to do if you, if it was self-inflicting. And also that there was 2 different calibers used to shoot Haarhoff and then himself. So that kind of ties into the whole conspiracy of it being that Gert was part of this major trafficking ring. And then also you remember that when Joey went to her daughter's house, she said, "You don't understand. If they find us, they will kill us." To me, that can have 2 explanations. She could either mean she's going to get the death penalty, which, if I understand and if I remember correctly, the death penalty was still a thing back then. She did say that she abducted a police's daughter to sell. So I actually had this debate with someone whether, why would she say that? That's such a horrendous crime to commit. Why would you admit to it and not rather say? But then the person debated that, it's better to say you try to sell them than to say you give them to Gert to do what he wants and then, you end up murdering them. So I honestly, it's a difficult one. I don't know. But Flippie van Rooyen, which is one of Gert's sons, claimed that the girls were abducted and murdered as part of some satanic ritual, that their bodies were put in acid and they were taken to the Middle East. He faced charges of statutory perjury because of that claim, but he was also serving a life sentence due to the gruesome rape murder of a 16-year-old Zimbabwean girl. Gert's other son has also had his run-ins with the law for fraud and theft, unrelated to theories about what happened to the girls, but ultimately to me shows how they were raised morally. In 2018, Joey's son, 48-year-old Braam Haarhof, was charged with unlawful sexual connection, attempted murder, and indecent assault in New Zealand after he assaulted a young girl. Like, what is going on? It would seem that the pair, whether through their direct victims or indirect, like offspring, just continues to cause pain and despair and release it into the world. In 2012, in Meadowbrook, Germiston, a homeowner wanted to remove his pool. While in the process of doing that, they discovered remains found under the steps of the pool. A green dress, black knitted tights, and a brass ring were found among a jawbone, an iliac bone, and 3 incisor teeth. The bones had evidence of it being sawed, which indicated that this body possibly was dismembered. And during the investigation by police and a private investigator that the homeowner hired, it led them to the company that installed the swimming pool. That company no longer exists today, but the company confirmed that they had no idea there were remains underneath the pool, and that at that time they used a lot of subcontractors to install pools and do odd jobs for them. one of those subcontractors that they regularly used was the construction company that Gert had with his brother. Now, they can't confirm definitively that Gert and his construction company did do this job, but there is a strong suspicion since this pool was installed in 1989, which was at the height of Gert's crimes. The remains were sent for DNA testing and compared to those of the 6 missing girls, but unfortunately, it was confirmed that it didn't match any of those 6 girls. But who was this? Whose remains were laying underneath a pool since 1989? It would come out that the remains belonged to a black girl. Now, many have said, but Gert's victims were young white girls. However, this was during apartheid. So, what are the chances that many of the victims that Gert had may have been black young women? And I'm sure back in those times, it wouldn't have been reported at all. And to also add to that fact, you know that Joan Booysen, remember the victim that escaped, she noted that there were school clothes laid out in the house on Haarhof Street. Now, police confiscated some of the clothing, and it came out that most of those clothes belonged to schools that were predominantly black. So it is a very good possibility that the remains found underneath the pool could be one of Gert's victims. Unfortunately, to this day, they still have not identified the remains. That case remains unsolved. But knowing this, there is absolutely no way that we will ever know how many victims Gert van Rooyen actually had. Today, this is a cold case. It's still open, but those 6 victims are still missing. I am not a tinfoil hatter. I've claimed that in the beginning of this video. But this case runs so deep and so wide, and there's so much conflicting information and conspiracy theories that getting yourself in a position where you start to doubt the evidence, where you start to doubt the claims and the official documents provided by police is just so easy. I can almost understand why it's such a complex case to solve, because the 2 people that would have been able to tell us what happened to those 6 girls ended their lives on the side of the road on a low bridge in Pretoria. They will never be able to tell us where those girls are. But since this is a haunted channel, I am going to also tell you the ghost stories that surround 227 Haarhof Street. Many passerbys have claimed to hear the sound of a sobbing woman, believed to be Joey Haarhoff, emanating from behind the walls. Others claim to see a tall, dark, angry-looking figure standing by the gate, almost guarding it, trying to protect his house from people entering. Many believe that that is Gert. Whether this is true or not, who knows? But my revenge-seeking mind kind of want to believe it, kind of want to believe that the 2 that committed these horrible acts are destined to live in agony on this plane, not being able to interact with anyone, just stuck here in, their own personal hell that they created. And I know that sounds a little bit, but if you've done as much research into this case as I, you kind of do get emotionally attached. And I have no sympathy for any of these 2. None at all. But it is easy to talk about Gert like he is this myth, a headline, a monster. But these were real children. Tracy, Fiona, Anna-Marie, Odette, Joan, and Yolanda. and who knows how many more. Their photos are still pinned on walls. Their families still wait for answers that may never come. So if we remember anything from this case, let it be this: justice delayed is not justice denied, unless we allow it to stay buried. Their names deserve more than silence, and their story isn't over, not until the truth is finally found. If you know of anyone, or if you yourself has any information about what might have happened to these 6 girls, please just reach out to the police and give them tips, leads. I cannot imagine not knowing where my child is. Like, that's horrible. But that's it. That's all I have right now. I'm sure I've missed out quite a few details, but this case is a lot. So it's a lot to cover. And I didn't want it to run into the 3 hours, because I can talk about this case for days. But I think I do need to take a break from this case. It was a whole week consumed by just the enormity of information. And at one point I got super overwhelmed with this case. And you know, I feel for those victims. I feel for their families. I think it's horrible. I think it's truly horrible that we don't know what happened to them. Yeah, I wish I could have said something more upbeat at this stage, but this case affected me. I wasn't even born when this happened. I wasn't even born when they passed. Those other 2 people. But still, it feels like, I was there. It does. Have a good day. Please, if you enjoy these kind of stories, if you like true crime, haunted tales, and history, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to do this really at least once a week, the long form. I do post a lot of shorts on majority South African paranormal stories, but I do try, especially on my YouTube, to kind of branch out and do some international haunted sites. But yeah, have a great December month, and then I'll see you in the next one. Have a spooky day.